Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Kim. I am the Associate Creative Director at Booth, and I also have the real big honor of being one of the jury for the selection committee for the brand storytelling. And I've had the honor to listen to Into the Mix podcast, and I'm here with the fabulous crew behind it. So why don't we get a little introduction from everyone that's on this panel today?
Yeah, I'm Taylor Henry. I'm the production supervisor of audio over here at Vox Creative, and have been helping to lead production on all our episodes with Ben and Jerry's for the past 3 years. So really excited to be here.
And I'm Martha Sally. I'm the supervising producer of branded audio at Vox Creative and have been leading creative on Into the Mix season 2 from the Vox side.
I'm Jay Tandon. I am the global head of digital marketing at Ben & Jerry's and have been fortunate to work with this Vox team on bringing this podcast to life along with Sanjana.
And yes, great transition. I'm Sanjana Mahesh, and I'm the Associate Integrated Marketing Manager here at Ben & Jerry's. And I've also been helping kind of bring this to life from the Ben & Jerry's standpoint.
Amazing. Nice to meet you guys. So before we get started, for anyone who hasn't had the chance to listen to Into the podcast, could you briefly describe what is Into the Mix podcast about?
So Into the Mix podcast is really a manifestation of one of the things that makes Ben & Jerry's very unique, which is our long history of advancing social justice issues. And it's doing it in the audio space. And it's really rooted in the idea of really finding joy on the way to justice, joy on the journey to justice. So it's about creating educational moments in this long form format that help our fans and consumers better understand the issues that Ben & Jerry's cares about. So season 1 was really about this really magical, unique intersection between art, culture, and activism, where a lot of great innovative stuff happens that really helps advance social movements. And hearing from celebrities, musicians, artists about how they use their platform to advance these types of issues. And season 2, we kind of we took the same approach around which issues we talk about. They're the issues that we care about as Ben & Jerry's, but kind of went to the other side of the coin. Instead of hearing from those with a big megaphone and a big platform like celebrities, we kind of took a different tact in which we really started to engage with people who are most impacted by these issues in their day-to-day life. So the most impacted folks. So that could be a teacher in Florida who was grappling with how to manage the murky new rules coming out around book bans in her district, or an Indigenous community in Canada that was resisting logging, right? So thinking about these issues like book bans or Indigenous rights that folks hear about in the headlines, and they hear talking heads and politicians talking about them, but don't often get to hear directly from the people who are grappling with them day to day. And so that's what we find really special about Into the Mix, is creating a unique platform to tell these unheard stories.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. I think Jay here had something really important, which is that the actual tagline to the podcast is a Ben & Jerry show about joy and justice. And we think that it's really important to hold both of those with equal weight. Jay mentioned, really understanding the road to justice and how it leads to joy. And, what we've really learned a lot about is like sort of the mechanisms that define the gap between survival and joy. And that means that Into the Mix is a show that very much starts in the present and drops people right into the heart of what's happening right now. But once we get in with people, we sort of do a lot of historical untangling so that we can really understand with depth and with nuance the mechanisms that in our first episode, we go all the way back to the Roman roots of voter disenfranchisement to really understand, how those mechanisms are still operating today. And again, defining that gap between survival and joy for so many of us.
What led the brand into creating a podcast about social justices?
As I kind of mentioned before, social justice is baked right into the DNA of who Ben & Jerry's is. And so we really look at all the different channels that we're fortunate to have as an ice cream company and think, how can we apply these in service of the issues that we care about? So Ben and Jerry's holds a coveted progressive values statement that really guides the company and the issues that we care about. And we wanted to figure out a way to harness the power of audio, right? It's a space that has really grown rapidly. It's a space that we know a lot of our fans and consumers spend a lot of time on, and is a really beautiful long form vehicle in which we can dig deeper into these issues and tell more rich stories than we otherwise can in a social post or a social video. So it was a natural fit to figure out how to tap into audio as a brand, and it was a perfect vehicle for our social justice work.
We're really proud that this partnership between Vox Creative and Ben and Jerry's has been super fruitful since 2020. We started with a show that really looked back at the history of how racism is written into law in this country and sort of where we've been, and we started there. We started with where we've been, and now I think into the mix sort of does a lot of that, like I said, that historical sort of contextualizing that's really important for understanding where we are now. But the other sort of really important part of the DNA of the show is that we look really firmly towards the horizon, with an eye on sort of galvanizing our audiences towards action and equipping them with tools to feel ready to take that action on behalf of the people they meet through the show.
That's amazing. And then I'm very curious, and I'm sure the audience is also curious, how do you determine the topic to discuss for each episode? And how do you tell these stories in a compelling way to get people to listen? Sanjana, maybe if you could start for us.
Yeah, I can take this one on. I think something that Jay mentioned that's relevant to this is, Ben and Jerry's has a long-standing history of being involved in these and moving forward these progressive movements. And we guide a lot of our decision making on our progressive social values. And so through this work, we've had a long-standing history of working on a lot of the topics that we do actually touch on within Into the Mix, both within season 1 and season 2. And I think one other caveat to that is that in working and driving these movements forward, we also, work to be culturally relevant and also relevant to what's happening in the world around us. How can we drive action without understanding the context that we're coming into and what's happening in the world? So those are the two big factors that we consider when we look at the topics that we choose. Then finally, when we choose the topic, one thing that's helped us really bring it to life in the model of our show of bringing real stories from real people is the partners that we have on the ground. Because we've worked in these topic areas for so long, we have so many strong partnerships with organizations that are on the ground doing this work. And so they've been able to help us kind of link to the folks on the ground who are facing these issues and who are able to tell their stories in a really compelling manner. And I think to the second part of your question of how these stories get compelling and how they drive our audiences is we're telling these stories on a really human level. And so we're taking issues that people may see in their day-to-day feeds and in headlines and showing them what someone like their next door neighbor or their best friend may face in their day-to-day lives. And so that's kind of the beauty of it, is it marries a lot of the work we've done in the past, marries our relationship with our partners, and it allows us to reach our audiences in a really relatable way.
Yeah, I feel like so much of the strength of our creative really starts in the strength of those relationships that Ben and Jerry's has, because by the time we get in touch with our guests, it's like they're so excited about being part of the work and really excited because they know that, Ben and Jerry's is an organization they can really trust to forward their mission and their story and to handle it with a lot of care. And so all we have to do then is figure out a date and time to get together. And one of the things that's been super exciting about this season is that we have been able to be on the ground with everyone that we've actually spoken to. So we go to them, we meet them in their homes, in their offices, in their communities, and we bring like the rich textural elements of like the kids getting home from school or going for a walk through the neighborhood, and sort of leaving space to be surprised by what people respond to in their day-to-day environment, leaving space for those really organic moments that you can't recreate the feeling and the sound of someone in their home, in their space, in their their element. And so that to me, like selfishly, creatively, has been my favorite part of the show, is like the textures that you just can't write. You can't soundscape in post-production, that you really have to like be there for on the ground. And I think the work is so much richer for it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about real everyday people, right? And I think, whether they're active in their communities and fighting these injustices, or are just working in their own lives to find peace because of what they may have faced, I think what listeners can take away here is that these individuals could really be any of us. It's kind of making these stories and these issues that we're facing a little more accessible. And I think, at least from a personal level, I think we can all feel a little lost in how we get involved in making a difference in our communities, or, simply just finding peace within our own lives and not getting caught up in resentment or other feelings similar to that. And it's in hearing stories like these that individuals can really get a sense of like where we go from here. And that's kind of been, something we really focused on in every single season, like where can we go from here? And also just kind of our listeners can take the knowledge that they're not alone in these feelings and facing these issues. We're all kind of together in this. And so I think, accessibility here, and in telling these stories truthfully, and again, to Martha's point, giving them the space to invite us into their homes and just kind of sit and listen. I think it's really important.
Oh, that's so great. And I know we talked briefly about the creative storytelling. I'm curious, what do you think is the most important part in creative storytelling?
I think one of the key things for us in embarking on this project was really the idea of, well, let me put it a different way. A lot of folks know about the issues that we're talking about. They hear about them all the time. I mentioned this earlier. They hear politicians and see them in the news headlines, that kind of thing. I think what we really set out to do was, how do we differentiate? And not just to say differentiate for difference sake, but how do we cut through that clutter and tell these stories talk about these issues in a different way, in a way that might break through or resonate with folks who otherwise say, yeah, look, I don't really want to listen to the politician talk about it. I don't really want to watch the news. So it was really about finding that creative way in that's different and that will reach people who otherwise wouldn't hear about it. And so that's the tact we took, and that's how we kind of wanted to approach this. And it was really centered on lifting up the voices of impacted people. And that was something that was a gap that we saw that we felt wasn't being done well, or at least not being done at scale and in the kind of networks that we were in. So we really felt that was a good, unique way in that was part of this creative storytelling. And we think that resonates. People really seem to appreciate hearing the human story in a space that's otherwise very noisy with not so personable, not so human feeling, really. So
I love that, Jay, and I think that the word I would use to describe like a lot of what we're doing, the shared mission, is just really centering authentic stories. I come from a legacy news background, and getting into branded storytelling has been a very different muscle. But one thing that I really, really appreciate is that Ben and Jerry's has been extremely dedicated to not glossing over some of the more difficult points of the experiences that are inherent within the injustices that we're speaking about on Into the Mix. And I think that that's been really important to the DNA of the show, is like looking the truth in the eye. And, we're not out here to investigate, and like really surface, new information. We're not doing journalism here, but what we are doing is chronicling very real experiences, and we're doing that through a specific lens, which is joy and justice, and like how do we look towards the horizon and what's the better future that we're all trying to imagine. but within that, we're really centering the authenticity of these people and honoring their experiences by you know, really making sure that they feel empowered to guide the conversation in the direction that they want to go in. And to me, like, from a journalistic background, but all, coming here, like what I didn't expect was to feel like actually I was having a more authentic conversation with the people I was sitting across from, not being a journalist, because I'm not out here like grilling people to dredge up things that feel like untold or like new information. My first question to everyone that I sit down with to record for this show is, what do you wish people knew about your experience? And I think that really starts us in a place where we can just connect on an extremely intimate and one-to-one level, that I hope is something that audiences can hear within the show.
Yeah, really giving our guests the space again to feel whatever they feel, to tell us their story in their way. I mean, we're really just there acting as like guides and support at a certain point. We're not there to shock, like create shock and awe. We really want to like lead with empathy and be present for these individuals. And again, give them that space. It's really humbling, to be honest, getting the privilege to speak with these individuals. And there simply is like no room for not being present, and not allowing someone that space. And I think what's also important here is just from a production standpoint, leaving our team room to be flexible and slick in our approach, right? We've kind of left space sometimes in our schedules to be able to pop by and visit some other individuals within our guests' lives, or just be able to change it up or have them like show us something else that is really important to their story. And I think again, moments like that create like that's just what's happening in real time. The authenticity is incredibly important, and allowing our guests and ourselves the space to explore and be able to tell their story in the best way possible.
One thing I actually would build onto here too, that I just wanted to shout out as well, is I think that we're handling a lot of these stories with a lot of compassion, and you can creatively tell a story or tell a story through a variety of mediums: video, audio, a bunch of different approaches. But audio gives us a lot of strength in you know, being able to bring these stories to life. So in our episode, I Am Water, you hear water and you hear it at the beginning of the episode, and that's carried throughout. And that goes to the compassion that the team has on the ground when they're listening to these stories, and making sure when these lived experiences are coming to life, you're not just hearing them say the words on paper, but you're hearing the whole thing come to life within minutes.
I love that. um, so I know you just previewed a little bit of one of the episodes, but Sanjana, I wonder if what was an unexpected way the podcast had an impact on you?
Yeah, so I think one thing when we started this adventure with season 2, it was definitely a departure from our approach with season 1. Season 1 was a bit more of an interview style. We're really highlighting some of the movement leaders, the cultural stalwarts on the ground, really driving movements forward. And this season's a completely different approach. And so I think in our minds, we felt good about it. We were excited about it, but I don't think we realized how impactful this would be and how moving these stories would be. And again, I think a lot of our goals in terms of, why we do this podcast and what we do here is to drive the movements that we believe in forward and to drive forward our progressive values. And we found that this show is both driving the movement forward, driving our audiences to take action, and also, moving the hearts and souls of all of our audiences and us alike.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just kind of iterating a little on what Sanjana said, but um, there were instances where there were individuals who came to us who had never told their story before.
Mm.
And the fact that they were kind of comfortable, um, to the previous point, they trusted Ben and Jerry's and the work that we've done in this space over many years, and really, spilled their heart and really told the full story and the story that needs to be heard. It was heartwarming for me that folks put the trust in that, and it made for an incredible show. And so I'm just, uh, feel really fortunate to be able to work on a project where we're able to hear from people and provide that safe space for them to share those stories, and that they're willing to, in some cases, share those with us for the first time they're sharing with anybody. So that was really surprising for me, but in a good way.
And
Right.
we were Taylor and I are like
Maybe you got to say the same thing.
pathically communicating, trying to at least. So I mean, the thing that like, my like yardstick for success or for impact, again, like comes down to like just how our guests feel at the end of their experience with us. And I've been really like heartened to hear from a lot of our guests that our time together feels affirming. The end product feels powerful as a vehicle for their story. That they feel respected, and a lot of the time what we hear from people is that they actually feel like refreshed by being able to like speak as candidly um as we make evident that we are willing to do and to hear from them. But we've heard from quite a few of our guests that they really have valued our time together, not just for like, the cool factor of like being on a Ben and Jerry's podcast and like having your story out and all this stuff. But I think like what we have heard again and again is that it feels good to tell your story in the way that we are asking people to tell their story, which was something that I was feeling really sensitive to, because a lot of these stories deal with enormous trauma, intergenerational trauma, and difficulties that might not resolve in any of our lifetimes. But people still feel like there's power in sharing, and I think that has been extremely affirming for me as a creative, to know that actually like the podcast is a vehicle not only for all these amazing things that we've talked about for action and for movement shifting and all this stuff, but also on a one-to-one level, people are leaving at the end of their time with us feeling maybe better than they did before we got together, and that is always going to be something that I take very seriously.
Yeah, 100%. About to say the exact same thing. Like it's been really special when guests and experts have all communicated to us, the storytelling is so important, and feeling so incredibly positive coming out of their time with us. And, it's personally impactful, and you can, again, hear it in the work. It's really special.
I love that. And then before we end, I would love to ask a question to everyone here in the panel. What was a moment within the production that was very memorable or struck you on a personal level?
I mean, not to be that guy, but I think I had referenced this in my last answer, which was, hearing from people who said they haven't told these stories before. So that kind of surprised me in a way that, not just in the sense of feeling that we're doing something that's really authentic to Ben and Jerry's and this really makes sense for us, but again, that they were willing to sort of be vulnerable, put that trust in us. That really is one of the biggest things that stood out to me, and that I share with people when I'm talking about the process of creating this. And I think it's reflective of the important role that Ben and Jerry's is able to play in this space, where folks are willing to share those stories, but knowing that we'll bring it to an audience in a way that, bless our nonprofit partners that we work with day in, day out, but in a way that those partners can't bring these messages to other folks. So very rewarding, and something I really appreciated as part of this process.
building on Jay's point, I'm going to build in here. I think for me, there was like two moments I felt very personally connected to in the show. First was our guest for episode two, Michael Thompson. He had never had Ben and Jerry's before, and he'd reached out, and we'd sent him a couple pints, and he'd sent us pictures of him eating the ice cream, but also listening to the episode and how much he enjoyed sharing his story. And he's continued to kind of reach out ever since. But I think, just hearing how happy he was first to try our ice cream. And when you hear his story, you'll understand how impactful and how meaningful it really is, why he's been able to try this ice cream and have that moment. But second, just how excited he was to be a part of the show and to share his story. It felt cathartic. It felt good for him to share it. And it was just, I felt very privileged to be the one to receive that feedback from him. And I think the second moment for me personally that I will always remember as a part of this podcast is the episode that we just launched. Episode 9 was actually based in my hometown, Louisville, Kentucky, and featured somebody who was a part of my life. And hearing the story from my hometown and in those eyes, and hearing the impact and seeing that story be told, I felt personally very impacted by it, and I felt that rippled through my own community, and I loved seeing it, and I loved people sharing it, amplifying it, and feeling moved by it, and feeling compelled to come forward. And I will encourage you to go to our site to check it out so you can hear more about what that story is.
And one other thing I guess I would just add, now that you've heard from the two marketing people from Ben and Jerry's, we're not here talking to you about the impressions or the earned media that we got or the return on investment. And I think that's been a certain beauty throughout the production process of this whole thing, is that folks both on the immediate team, but more broadly within both organizations, recognize that this is about authentic storytelling. And if we do that well, we don't need to worry so much about some of these more vanity metrics, right? And so that's been a really beautiful part of this process as well, is that this has been so supported organizationally as truly a vehicle to lift up these issues, and it's not acting just in service of trying to like sell ice cream or something. So that's, again, part of the beauty of Ben and Jerry's business model from day one, but it helps lead to programs like this.
Yeah, it's been really incredible getting the freedom to not measure ourselves against a lot of those KPIs that Jay was mentioning. But I think one of my favorite moments from production, Sanjay, I love that you mentioned Michael, because I'm thinking back to like our weeks leading up to our time with him and Flint. That episode is episode 2, The New Green Cotton. And it's about Michael Thompson, who spent 30 years in prison for a marijuana charge. The year that he was released, marijuana sales reached the $1 billion mark, I believe, in the state of Michigan where he was incarcerated. So it's really a story like that looks back at the war on drugs, and we get into a lot of how restorative justice is really key in making sure that legal marijuana doesn't continue to harm the Black community in America. And so Michael, first of all, was extremely enthusiastic about our meeting. And, typically when we get in touch with guests, we're like telling them, we tend to spend around 3 hours together on one day, and then we kind of clean up with an hour or so of audio the next day. And, we'd love to meet you and go somewhere that feels important to you. But, we'll spend the bulk of our time in a quiet space that you have access to so that we can really get into the meat of your story, all this stuff. And Michael was like, that's all very nice, but what we're actually going to do is go and meet the entirety of Flint, Michigan. So we jumped in a car together and we spent probably 4 or 5 hours driving around Flint, like literally meeting people like at street corners, because he was like, oh, this guy tends to be around here this time on Tuesdays. And what we got was this really incredible collage of voices, many of whom knew Michael prior to his incarceration, some of whom knew Michael during his incarceration, like being incarcerated together on very similar charges. and really know him today to be a movement maker, an impact maker in the community. And that to me was such a humbling experience as a producer, because, you know, my job is to plan everything to the T. I mean, me and Taylor, it's like we've got the run sheet, we've got the shot list, we've got, you know, all these things that we've got to go out and we've got to get. And Michael was like, yeah, you're not going to need that. Like, just come with me. Like, I'm going to show you everything you need. And so you can really hear those textures primarily in the beginning of the episode. But what we ended up getting was this like very unexpected 360-degree portrait, not only of this man, but also of so many other people in his community who have been affected by the same injustice that he has been affected by. And so we got this like multi-layered, super, super, super textural understanding of how one incarceration has ripple effects throughout an entire community. And like, I couldn't have written that. We couldn't have planned for that. And I'm really glad that that experience happened as early as it did in the production, because I feel like he set us up for success to and with the understanding and the hope that, you know, if we go in flexible, like Taylor said, we're going to get more magic on tape than we ever thought possible. And so thank you to Michael for being such a teacher to me, for, you know, planning for all contingencies, but more than anything, leaving space to be surprised by what we find. That is probably one of my favorite sort of like sonic moments of the show. All of those voices coming together and being so stoked to see Michael out and about.
All right, I'm going to do two shameless plugs real quick. The first shameless plug is for the Vox team and why we love working with them. They have the plan with the 30 bullets, and they can also go with the curveball of completely new plan. Guest has a good idea. How do we embrace it? How do we, again, make this authentic, make it natural, and make them comfortable? So thanks to the Vox team for that. The second is Michael Thompson has Michael Thompson's Clemency Project, which is an organization that he started to do reforming the criminal legal system. So as Martha was mentioning, he's well known in the community, and he's started to kind of channel his energy into that work since being released. So for those of you who are interested, Michael Thompson Clemency Project.
Love that drop. And Taylor, why don't you round us off? What was your most memorable moment?
Yeah, I think definitely Flint was incredible, and I'm really grateful I got to be there for that. I think a couple of other moments for me. One, when Martha and I went to visit Chrissy in Canada, who's a community member of the First Nations. And that episode really speaks to the mercury poisoning of their land, as well as logging within their community. And I have to say that was probably one of the most like humbling experiences in my production career. And I'm sorry that the words aren't necessarily fully there for that. But it was really special getting to speak with Chrissy in multiple locations in this community, but also just kind of being able to, with her and just with our small crew, sit there and feel the nature around you, and both the heartwarming parts of all of it, and with also the sad. And I don't really know how to fully explain that. But it's really special and kind of leaves you with okay, like we need to tell this story and tell it right. As well as like figure out how it leaves you with that sense of like, what can I do? You know? And I think what was also really special about that was, again, being within nature and hearing the episode literally sonically create itself in real time. I think Martha and I kind of, we just heard it all coming together without having even gone into tape yet.
Yeah. Our sweet our field engineer Andrew Hammond, he's a really incredible member of our team, came with us to really manage all of the sonics on location. And Taylor and I were like, that bird sounds cool, like Andrew, go over there. And it felt like we were like interviewing the land just as much as we were interviewing Chrissy. And that felt really, really important because you know the Dene community that she and others in Canada are part of. Dene means of the land, and so you really can't separate the individual from the experience of being part of the landscape. And so it felt really, really important that we capture all those elements and give them their shine and their moment in the tape as well.
It's a beautiful episode.
Yeah, I hinted at it earlier, but first 10 seconds, you're hooked, and everyone who's listened to it from our side, immediate chills. So highly plug. And I would also plug that in our show notes for all of our episodes, you'll find different ways to get involved with a lot of our different guests and the actions they're driving. You'll probably find a trend that all of our guests are also remarkable people that are working to create movements or working to help within their own communities. And that's a really good example of an episode that has that too.
I think one other thing that was special for me, and again, this goes to being able to be in person, right? I generally I'm a production supervisor, so I generally operate as like logistical, I'm there to make sure it all goes according to plan, and figuring out ways in which we can deviate if needed. But there was an episode 11, I went back to my hometown of Chicago, and also operated as a creative producer for a minute, with our guest Flo, and took a walk with him throughout the city. And it was just like a free-flowing conversation. It was really beautiful, talking about his life, talking about my, just really getting into it with each other. And it's just special being able to get to know somebody in that way, and then exchange hugs and mutual gratitude at the end. It's really special. And again, I don't get to operate in that capacity too often these days anymore, so it was special getting to do that.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing. And I think I really appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts and answers and feelings, because I do think you can sense a lot of that with each episode. And I encourage everyone who's listening in to check out their podcast, Into the Mix. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.